Hello everyone! Due to reasons, I'm not going to be visible in this video. So instead of choosing between watching me make faces and pretending it's a podcast and just listening in, you can choose between looking at my amateur artwork and pretending it's just a podcast and just listening in. Apparently I don't know what ships look like. Sorry. I tried.
Paul Revere's ride to rally the people in preparation for the confrontation at Lexington and so on has been memorialized in Longfellow's famous poem, Paul Revere's Ride.
It's a simple but beautiful poem which touches on the ride itself and the surrounding activities, becoming bloody work and the concern there in that silent church tower before the signal was given. That being said, it's been criticized for a few things. The first is for being too simple of a poem, and I can't really speak on that. Despite calling myself a bard, I'm not really very well trained in poetry. I've written maybe 2 or 3 that weren't absolutely terrible, but I don't know much beyond simple rhythms and rhymes. So whether or not this is a valid criticism is beyond my skill to determine. However, the other main criticisms arise from concerns about historical accuracy, and while these critics are correct in pointing out these inaccuracies, they fail to understand the point of the poem. First, what are these inaccuracies? Well, perhaps the most glaring two are that the lanterns weren't lit for Mr. Revere. They were lit for other riders, since they weren't certain that Paul would be able to get out of Boston in time. Then he slipped over by boat, past the Somerset, here depicted badly with watercolors I've only been playing with for a week, and 2 waiting allies. The signal was confirmed, and off they went. Yes, they. The second most glaring inaccuracy here is that there were multiple riders that night. These included William Dawes, who got his rather bitter poem by Helen Moore about how he lacks the silversmith's fame, and Samuel Prescott, who doesn't even have that. To be fair, Mr. Prescott didn't leave from Boston, instead being more of a tagged-in relay runner in the race to spread the message that the regulars were on their way. He was also, in the spirit of a proper relay, though certainly not how it was intended, the only one of the 3 who finished the ride, as Revere was captured and Dawes was nearly captured and opted for the valor of discretion rather than foolhardiness. Now, some of you may be wondering what in the world I mean by regulars. See, this happened in 1775. The Declaration of Independence wouldn't be ratified until 1776. At this point, the revolutionaries saw themselves as good, patriotic British. So the cry of "the British are coming," which we've heard from some sources, just wouldn't be historically accurate. It would be the regulars, as in the regular soldiers, not the militiamen or what have you, or the redcoats, so called for their high-visibility uniforms. Also, apparently the whole uniform thing is why the bad guys wear red in the States, but is red as a heroic color elsewhere. Don't get me wrong, the US also has heroes who wear reds, like, say, Superman. But between that being the British uniform color from the start, and then later on things like the Red Scare, red just is a less heroic color here. And when it is given to a hero, it's usually paired with blue or other colors. But that's just a tangent. Right. Okay, it's been several minutes, like 3 or more, and I've gone over the biggest historical inaccuracies. Why do I think this isn't actually a problem if they are, in fact, inaccurate? Well, it's the intent of the poem. Longfellow wasn't trying to write a historically accurate telling of events. He was trying to write a legend. He was guiding the story to become more folktale than mere history. Don't get me wrong, history is cool and incredibly important, but folktales and legends help bring our past to life. I don't see anyone arguing that Cuchulain's story isn't historically accurate, and as far as I can tell, that guy might never have existed to begin with. The difference between that and Paul Revere is that he and his ride were actual events with actual records. Longfellow was just embellishing them. Wouldn't it be cool to have the folktales to tell around the fire and the histories to discuss in class? As long as we can accept that it's not meant to be history so much as legend, I don't see the problem with the poem having a few inaccuracies. But maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm missing something here, because, I'm just another Gen Z kid rambling about stuff online here. But I really don't see the problem, especially since the main point of the poem and the event are consistent. The message went out. The people came. A cry of defiance and not of fear. The fate of a nation was riding that night. So with all that being said, here's Longfellow's poem, Paul Revere's Ride, which I haven't finished memorizing yet, despite having to ship this video back a full week, so I'll have to read it and keep working on it in the meantime. Sorry, everyone.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, on the 18th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or by sea on the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light, 1 if by land and 2 if by sea. And I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm for the country folk to be up and to arm. Then he said good night, and with muffled oar silently rowed to the Charlestown shore, just as the moon rose over the bay, where, swinging wide at her moorings, lay the Somerset, British man of war, a phantom ship with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile, his friend, through alley and street, wanders and watches with eager ears, till, in the silence around him, he hears the muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats on the shore. Then he climbed to the tower of the church, up the wooden stairs with stealthy tread to the belfry chamber overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the sombre rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade. To the trembling ladder, steep and tall, to the highest window in the wall where he paused to listen and look down a moment on the roofs of the town, and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath, in the churchyard, lay the dead, and their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear like a sentinel's tread the watchful night wind as it went, creeping along from tent to tent, and seeming to whisper, all is well. A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead, for suddenly all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed on the landscape, far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth, and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the Old North Church, as it rose above the grave on the hill, lonely and spectral and sombre and still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer, and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes, till, full on his sight, a second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles, in passing, a spark, struck out by a steed that flies fearless and fleet. That was all, and yet, through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night. And the spark struck out by that steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat. He has left the village and mounted the steep, and beneath him, tranquil and broad and deep, is the mystic, meeting the ocean tides, and under the alders that skirt its edge. Now soft on the sand, now loud on the ledge, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. It was 12 by the village clock when he passed the bridge into Medford town. He heard the crowing of the cock and the barking of the farmer's dog, and felt the damp of the river fog that rises when the sun goes down. It was 1 by the village clock when he galloped into Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting-house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock and the twitter of birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadows brown. And one who was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. You know the rest. In the books you have read, how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball from behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again under the trees at the turn of the road, and pausing only to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For, born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, and the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people awaken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of the steed, and the midnight message of Paul Revere.